is JongHwa Lee. I'm a faculty member in the Communication and Mass Media Department, and I have to say that I'm very honored to join this evening and to talk about this meaningful topic and also to possibly contribute to tonight's event. But I have to also say that when like my previous professor that was talking about that kind of sense of weight, I felt I had the same feeling. There was a kind of uneasiness at first that had this question, what do I know to possibly talk about this big topic? And in fact, it was the historical moment that was before me, at least a generation before me. So there was that kind of doubt as well, as much as suspicion. But at the same time, I wanted to join this conversation because Professor, the organizers of this event, encouraged me. At the same time, there is this branch of studies in communication that study the communication of public commemoration. And in fact, there is the big part of this branch of study is on the Vietnam Memorial, the museum, as well as the wall and the statue. So I thought that at least I can introduce what's been studied in communication studies and possibly to join the conversation. In addition, it also came from my kind of personal understanding that, as was introduced earlier, that my so far my special area of study is more about collective memory on Second World War, especially in Northeast Asia. And one of my understanding from that Holocaust study and Asian studies is that oftentimes the survivors and the veterans fear the most about being forgotten. And I have so far learned that they appreciate the conversation, even if it means at times we question each other. So that's the kind of motivation that I joined tonight. So, from our study, tradition of public commemoration, it means to select and appreciate such extraordinary events from ordinary historical sequence, which embody our deepest and most fundamental values. And in fact, this is something that has been studied over 2,500 years, more than that. That when Aristotle first articulated the meaning of rhetoric happened in epidictic, deliberative, and the forensic moment to value or to appreciate what's important in the community. And that's exactly what happens when we commemorate collectively in the community by the public. And today, I have to say, in the modern trends of public commemoration, is more emphasis in the use value and the belief in the simplicity and essentialism and optimism. So therefore, you no longer see these grand statues of the important figures and the persons or the events, but instead we tend to name the road and buildings and the parks to remember and to appreciate the names and the events of the people. And this is something consistent with the story shared by the veterans as well. And these are some of the quotes that I got from the interview. To memorialize and to dedicate through ceremonies. And sometimes we name those on XX Road, YY Park, and ZZ Building, and AA Hall. And we never heard this word, welcome home and thank you. It was very emotional experience. It's very common to talk about these experiences. Many people say that these are very important and also very emotional. And sometimes we understand there are disagreements, and it happens in both sides of the people. And in some other occasion literature I read, from different parties, when someone hears the criticism coming from the other side, they had this expression called, it's as if my blood is running against this stream. It's that kind of visceral and emotional and powerful feeling to hear anyone that criticized that memory of the person that had won that historical event. And to find the name of fellow veteran or loved one, this person is talking about the wall, the veteran, the Vietnam Memorial Wall part, and just fell to the knees and left the sword to honor his brother. For him, the leading memento is a way of honoring, of remembering, or of connecting to that name inscribed on the wall. And these offerings to whatever gods oversee, his shrine tells us as much a story as the wall itself, and you can see that these are equally emotional as much as a spiritual way of understanding. Although I had seen many photos of the wall, it was still a staggering sight. It made me tear up as I imagined what a massive crowd of veterans it would have if a single person representing each of the names just appeared for a moment together. I felt sad and remorseful for the families. I felt thankful that none of my family were lost in that war and listed on the wall. So it is as much a powerful emotional experience, but at the same time, people go through, at times, conflicting emotional feelings as well. And those who place things at the wall do so as a most personal way of assuring the deceased and the rest of us about their sincerity in remembering those souls lost. I believe it is an ultra-personal expression, possibly unable to be put into words. I believe it is the most profound emotion that I have never felt due to the loss of a friend in the war. So these are the kinds of testimony you will hear from the veterans and persons who were interviewed and who remember and recollect their experiences. So I'd like to shift the context a little bit or take a step out a little bit to understand from a communication perspective. So, if you look at the main website of this War Stories project, and when you click on the veterans, the Vietnam War section, this is the photo that you will see. Okay? And it is a part of Vietnam Memorial. At the same time, when you look at the side part of the textual part, these are the frequently asked questions. Who do you want to interview? Is it exactly the same kind of feeling that, am I qualified to speak? Does my experience count? What am I? Important? In what way? But I didn't do anything interesting. As the part interesting is coded, it raises an interesting question. So when we say interesting story, what do we mean by it? From whose perspective? And what if I didn't see combat? And I'm not entirely sure if I want to talk about my military service. So again, there is that kind of conflicting desire, as much as to join the conversation, but at the same time to withdraw from the conversation, because it is difficult to remember and to share. Something that's often people say that beyond the words can explain, or language can represent. So, that's the context for our website. But if you remember that when people commonly say the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, often the main part of the memorial is this wall, the black granite wall that inscribed all the names of the soldiers and the people who passed away following the year. In a way, it's chronological collection of the names of the people, individuals who passed away in each year. So usually, that is the main part of the memorial. And then you have this question about that statue of the soldiers. The statue is actually the addition to the original design of the wall. It's standing the other side right there, in a way facing each other. And that's something I want to point out, that in a way these two messages, or the statues and the works and the text, may convey a little bit different messages about the same experience. And it becomes more clear to follow the history of this Vietnam memorial construction. Because at first, what's described as the nasty part, the Maya Lin, who is the original designer of the memorial, who was at the time undergraduate student at Yale University. And her design was chosen and approved by all requisite authorities. And later, her design was objected by some veterans, and Congressman Rhetoric, and then Interior Secretary Watt following stop order. And their objection was, it was not heroic enough. It was not traditional enough. Compared to the next statues, such as the Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, they all look grand and tall and uplifted, looking heroic and patriotic. So the criticism is, why can you build something more traditional and something more heroic and patriotic? And these two views were compromising. Two views were not yielding. So the compromise was to build them together, in addition to a flagpole. So, rhetorically speaking, in communication perspective, it is a question, as much as conflict, over appropriate ways of commemoration. It is a historical and political battle over what can be said and who can speak to whom for what. And that's where we draw these implications for communication and rhetoric. So, what's interesting about Vietnam Veterans Memorial is that you find that these memorial as a together conveys sometimes multiple and contradicting stories. Unresolved and yet compromised, to have them together and facing each other. And some of the authors point out that to face one and you have to turn your back on the other. That kind of symbolic setting that grounds your interaction with the part in the memorial. And some people say that the wall is simple chronicle of death. And the statue is a synecdoche. It's a hypothetical moment depiction of hypothetical three-person representing the whole. One is the wall is accessible. There is no regulation to touch or not touch. So oftentimes you find people touching and leaving some things and hugging and weeping, as opposed to the other more traditional statues that are less accessible. And also it says that this kind of multiple and contradicting meaning, to understand what this memorial or the meaning of this part is, owes to the multiple authors, meaning that it eliminates the only authorial who authored the authority to define the meaning of what that memorial is about. Meaning that originally the only condition of Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, the fund, was to have the list of names. That was one condition. That way, in part, the design owes its request. And the Maya Lin's wall and the Frederick Hart, the statue. All these things, in a way, multiple authors contributing to this memorial place and memorial expression, experience. In addition, when people visit these memorials, they leave their personal artifacts and mementos. And these are working as supplements, in addition to people who ever standing next to the wall, in a way, are quoted and part of that picture and experience. Therefore, it changes the meaning to different person, to different date, and to different relationship from the person who visit there and the kind of artifact they leave there. In that way, in a way, for communication, it resists definitive and final meaning of what that memorial is about and how we should commemorate this war. So, what this leaves for us at this point, perhaps this question I would like to share with you, for a society like ours, in a time when we became suspicious of big plans, big narratives, and big ideas, perhaps without faith, without dream, without confidence, how do we commemorate what's important for our community and who should be remembered and what do we commemorate? That's the question I want you to share with you. Thank you very much.